Aid agencies say the famine in Gaza has ended due to an increase in aid flowing into the Strip. However, they warn that 3/4 of the population still face acute hunger and malnutrition. Scott Craig is the Senior Media and Crisis Communications Officer at the International Federation of Red Cross and Red Crescent Societies, and he joins me now live from Geneva. Thank you for joining me, Scott. So what are your colleagues on the ground telling you about the situation as it stands now in Gaza?
Well, Jeff, thank you very much for having me, and thank you for continuing to cover the story in Gaza, because I think it's interesting and I think it's important that we don't allow it to slip away from the headlines. The situation in Gaza for people living there, and the humanitarian situation is still incredibly fragile. As you said in the introduction there, of course, it's a positive development that there is no longer a finding of famine by the IPC. However, the situation is still that there is severe hunger in Gaza, and kids are going to bed hungry, and too many families don't know where their next meal is coming from. And so while there is more aid getting into Gaza, and that is welcome, what we and other humanitarian organizations have been calling for is for that to be further scaled up, and for unimpeded access to Gaza, and for the opening of all entry points to allow that aid to be scaled up even further.
There have been cases, haven't there, of infants dying of hypothermia. How bad are the conditions that vulnerable people are exposed to?
Conditions right now in Gaza are terrible. I mean, as your viewers may be aware, there's been severe flooding and cold weather in Gaza. Most people have been living outside because of the extent of the damage to their homes and to structures there. And so people have been living in tents and plastic sheets and temporary structures, many of which have been flooded now. And there are shortages of shelter materials coming into Gaza, and that's one of the main problems being faced now. Our colleagues at the Palestine Red Crescent are telling us that around 1 million people in Gaza need help with shelter, and of course it's the most basic item facing most families at the moment is their housing. And so again, while the situation has improved somewhat in terms of the food security situation, it still remains critical, and the conditions that people are living in, in the winter ahead, is looking pretty bleak.
Well, yes, that's what I wanted to say, Scott. Of course, we've got several months of winter left, haven't we?
We do, and to go back to what I was saying at the beginning, it is welcome that more aid is getting in. I mean, that is a good thing, but I think the bar was set very low, because before the ceasefire came into effect in October, of course, there was no aid getting in, and so of course, there is a massive backlog of human needs on the ground, and one of those needs that we're seeing at the moment is shelter, and so there are still several weeks to go with winter, as you say, and we've seen. I know you've been covering it on CGTN. We've seen the images of people being flooded, people, particularly vulnerable people, children, the elderly, people with medical needs, because that's another critical aspect of this to highlight as well. Gaza's healthcare system has been shattered, and so health facilities are operating, but they're operating at a minimum level, and so you have essentially this situation where all of the basics are there to a very, very limited extent. And so it's a kind of perfect storm for a very difficult winter ahead.